I'm Tyler, and this is the AntiSocial Network.
Don't look away. Let the fear wash over you.
How? How do you manage every time to pick open a wound to a fresher hell?
Welcome to your number one source of internet oddities.
My IQ is the highest among all Reddit.
That's not saying much.
Here we host conversations with interesting people across the internet.
There's something beyond the direct physical observable world. You can't quantify, you can't put under a microscope. If you don't want to, immediately adopt the Muslim understanding of that, that's fine. You'll get there eventually.
You haven't heard of them, but I have.
It's not just witchcraft, it's nerds. You guys are nerds. My parents didn't let me read Harry Potter, not because of the demonic elements. They just didn't want me to be a nerd.
Join us every Friday for discussions on culture, entertainment, politics, religion, and whatever happens to catch our fancy that week.
I've always deemed myself an evil capitalist.
Because that's how they get you. They get in your head. They start making you ask funny questions. And before you know it, bang, you're a liberal.
I thought it was a matter of record.
Social credit deducted.
You're probably thinking this is some pretty deep stuff, and you're right.
Happy Halloween! This week we are joined once again by Ian Kirkpatrick, the now four-time author. I believe that we had her on, for the first time 2 years ago, and when at that point she didn't have her book out, and now she's got 4 books out. And
that's hot.
all of my fans need to go out and buy them right now, because I'm going to go beat them up if they don't. So they need to do that already. They're not contributing to our bottom line. So
I mean, you could either have a really good time and enjoy yourself, or you could have a really good time roasting the heck out of it. So like, what is there to lose?
She profits either way. So this works for everyone. That way you get an emotional reaction out of it, and that way you don't have to go through life not feeling anything. That's the important thing. So
I think everybody will get something out of Boom, because who doesn't get something out of mocking the feds?
The feds. Well, okay, actually, that's not true, because the feds get fed bait. So
yes.
Which is what they want. They need targets for their completely real terrorist attacks that are happening no, I'm kidding. But, or am I? But,
it's the birds. The birds are government. The birds are not real.
I do have a couple of birds aren't real stickers floating around my apartment, so, but...
Look, all you gotta do is go to the Spy Museum on Le Pen. They tell you all about the fake birds, the spy birds.
The only problem with the birds aren't real thing is that the guy who created the meme version of it is a freaking sellout. Like, he's been...
Oh, no.
Yeah, he's been profiled by, like, every major newspaper, and they're all like, oh, why did you do this? Oh, it's like a parody thing. And I'm like, oh, okay, either this is just some kid who made birds aren't real stickers, and then the mainstream media decided to just cart him out as a, look how fake conspiracy theories thing is, or the guy just, he collapsed under pressure, and when the New York Times called him one day, and he's like, oh, it's not real, it's just a joke, it's just a joke, it's just a joke.
It's just a joke, right? As if we all haven't said that a couple of times in our life.
Yeah, you put him on on CNN with the earbud in his ear, and you tell him what to say right before you take him out into a hallway and introduce him to the birds, if you will. Anyway, so you have the second book in your Bodymore trilogy. By the time this comes out, it'll either be just out or about to come out. So.
And it's gorgeous. Like, you thought the first cover was beautiful. We've got this masterpiece is the first book. This masterpiece is the second book.
I do like the edging on that. That adds a lot to the overall look of it. Although I do like the first one's very clean too.
They're both very, and the third one is going to be great too, because Sam, the cover artist, he has been looking forward to doing the skeleton birds. So we're going to work in a raven skeleton. More deteriorated, not like a random bird, but like the bird will be partially a skeleton, if not fully a skeleton on the next one. So they're all beautiful works of art.
So I know you went ahead and spoiled the ending to the first book last year when we had you on to talk about that, but
did I?
I seem to recall you gave away a lot. So So tell me about what's going on with the new one. Where are you at in terms of the overall trilogy and the story you're trying to tell?
So you're not going to be able to know what's happening in the second one without spoiling the first one, because the books heavily rely on the previous book to set up the next book. So if you haven't read the first one, like, you already know what happens in the first book anyway, because it's in the trailer that I do, where it ends with Soul saying, "Josephine, you're dead." So the main character dies. It's a ghost story. But it does actually affect things. That's just, you have to start out with that knowledge, because book 2 starts out with Joey being dead. And the whole trajectory of the second book has to do with her dealing with the consequences of being dead, which are like ghost rage. If you think of how you no longer really have a trajectory, like a future, because your existence isn't there anymore. So when she meets people, they don't remember her from the last time that they met her. So she can't have a future, because she's starting from zero with everyone except for those that know her soul. But then you've also got the extreme emotions, because in my books, the way that I deal with the ghost lore is that humans are made up of 3 parts. You've got the soul, the heart, and the body. And so when you die, a raven comes and eats your heart, the reaper takes your soul, and then your body is left on earth to rot. And so that separates the elements that make you a human. And so with her, when she's just a soul, she doesn't have the body anymore, which ties her to the earth, and she doesn't have a heart that gives her the humanity. So now she has to deal as being a human without humanity. And that's what creates like the ghost rage that just destroys everything, and you get tunnel vision and you want to kill and break things, and is kind of the cause behind a lot of the damage in Baltimore. It's a bunch of dead people just that couldn't stay dead and are taking out the rage of their loss and their regret on everyone else around them, because their ghost rage blinds them to their own follies and sees everyone else as the problem.
Yeah.
So you have to go into the book knowing that lore, and what you get from the first book and from that start off point. So the entirety of the first book is Joey dealing with having all of that baggage of being dead, and then also her best friend is a ghost, and he keeps accidentally killing people every time she turns her back. But so she's dealing with trying to help her best friend get a rein in on his ghost rage, but she's also got to level that with her relationship with her actual boyfriend, which up until the end of the first book, she didn't recognize it as being, oh, we are that serious. But it had been that serious. So she kind of has to find her place in the world between the changing of her relationships of her best friend, who has been there with her since grade school, and her boyfriend, who has been her rock for like the last 3 years, and that she can't maintain the same relationship she had with her best friend, because her best friend is also a guy. And so she's dealing with who she relies on more and who she's putting time in more, because if she spends time with her boyfriend, trying to get her boyfriend to understand what's going on with her, her best friend is murdering people. And if she's with her best friend who's murdering, to try to stop him from murdering people, her boyfriend is like, where the fuck are you? We have problems. And so it's kind of just this balance of where she is in life and trying to level that with where she is as a dead person and where she goes from there.
And you always envisioned this as a full trilogy then?
No, I didn't actually. I envisioned it as a standalone when I was writing the first one 2 years ago. And then I got to the end of the first one and I started working on Boom. But then as I was reflecting on the end of Bodymore, I was like, Joey's story isn't over yet. She just got over the first thing, which was dealing with her relationship with her father. Because if you look at the first book, the thing that's holding her back from relating to the world, from moving on with her life, is the way that her father's ghost hangs over her, and the trauma of her childhood doesn't really let her go and live her life. And so at the end of the first book, I mean, obviously now we're spoiling it because the second book is the one that's coming out. But at the end of the first
Buy them all!
You miss out on the actual relationship and watching the story go and the character grow by not going into it. But this really doesn't change anything. It just gives you the context of why the first book ends with her shooting her dad in the head. But he's holding her back. And so once she clears that roadblock that has been the thing stopping her from having the relationships, and you see that throughout the book where like Jag, her boyfriend, is like, hey, you should not go home, because he knows that her dad beats her. He's like, you should stay at my place, or we should connect. You need to be somewhere safe. He's not too pushy because she'll run off because she's kind of flighty like that. She's afraid of commitment. But so he tries to work on her, but she keeps wanting to go back to her dad because she's got this attachment issue. And so it's finally when she's free of her dad that she's then in the second book able to evaluate her relationships with everybody around her. And then in the third book, after she's dealt with the way she relates to other people, she's able to start relating to the city of Baltimore, which she discovers like, okay, I love this city, and it's one of the reasons why so many of us aren't leaving, even though we know how bad it is. We love this city like we love somebody who is going through like a withdrawal or going through an addiction where it might be really bad, but you're not just going to ditch them when they go through a hard time. You want to help them get to the other side and to be a better version of themselves. So she starts seeing that, and also she starts understanding how other people will sacrifice their well-being or themselves for the people that they love, and she starts being able to understand how people could love her.
So what's in backing up a little bit? What I mentioned that this is I believe your 4th published book to date, correct?
Yes.
What's changed in your creative process that's letting you put out so many books in such a short time? Like, is this just something that's kind of happened as a result of preparing for several years and then all of them dropping at once, or is this because you're just kind of that deep into the weeds into your writing process?
Kind of both. So the first book that I released in 2020 was my debut project, period. It was the one that I started back in 2010, and it's one that I did as my graduate school project in 2014. I applied to graduate school with the first couple of chapters of it, where Dead End Drive did not have a full manuscript at all. It was like maybe 5 or 6 chapters when I entered grad school, and then I worked on it in grad school up until 2016, where I technically had a finished manuscript, and then I worked on it for a couple more years while I switched in between other projects. So I finished a version of Dead End Drive, moved on to a completely different book, and then wrote like 3 or 4 other first drafts between finishing Dead End Drive and then published Dead End Drive. And after that, I pretty much nailed down what my process is for writing. So really, I've figured out how I need to write in order to complete things. Because Bodymore, Boom, 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 and the second Bodymore have all been written in the last 2 years. But Dead End Drive took like 8 years to write.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, I think you've already talked about you already announced sequels to at least 2 of your books coming out. And I think maybe possibly more at this point. Like, where are you at in terms of where are you at in your planning stage?
You mean just for writing those books? So I have the way that I write, I don't have to do heavy plotting. Like some people do heavy outlines. I kind of just get an idea of where it's going to start, and then I get the inciting incident at the beginning of the story, and generally where like maybe the first climactic, because I break everything down into 3 acts just to help me compartmentalize stories. I just need to have that impulse of where is this story starting and where is it going to go, and then I just start writing down individual lines as characters start saying things to me. So you've got like the one interaction where in the second Boom book where Jan is meeting Blake's stepdad and they're talking about the ATF. I'll just have an idea of how these characters are interacting, and then I'll write that down and come back to it later. But the way that I know that I'm going to have that book is because I have an inciting incident and I have the beginning of the first climax, which the inciting incident is Jan and Blake coming to North Carolina so that Jan can visit Blake's parents, since they just spent the last couple of months in Ukraine together. And Jan was sold on this chick the second that he saw her in the airport in the first book. But the inciting incident is going to be very similar to the one in the first book, where Jan, set off an explosion at the border of Russia. Well, in this one, he goes to a national forest, because he still has a YouTube channel that he's got to do stuff for while he's in America. So he and Blake go to a national forest in North Carolina to shoot a video, and he accidentally sets off an EMP that wipes out a part of the East Coast. And everybody thinks that the Chinese have finally launched an attack on America. And then the feds show up at Blake's door, because also obviously they know that Jan is in the country because he came through customs. But so then the whole thing becomes basically a road trip style story as Jan and Blake try to get to the embassy to explain what happened. Using her dad's prepper RV, and then the feds trying to catch up.
That's a good premise. I like that.
And so then the fact that I know what the inciting incident is and what they need to go and do, that's all that I need to go, this is going to be a story, because I know there's still stuff to tell. And so like that's what happened with Bodymore, is that I finished the first one and I went, oh, she had this first arc, but she didn't completely mature. Like she still has her issues that she needs to work out. And so I got the inkling of what was in the second book with, oh, she needs to work out being dead, and what exactly is going on with her best friend who's also dead, and where is that going to go? And so then I knew when I started that then the third book, she also still had kind of her own personal cycle to complete as a character growth. And that's how I know to plan forward for.
Has it struck you the possibility that we might be at war with between Taiwan and China by the time this comes out?
Yes, I'm like, if this becomes another premonition story, I can't help it. I'm sorry. Maybe someday I'll make a name for myself by accidentally just coming up with story ideas that are insanely relevant, but they're also insane.
Oops, did I actually a war?
I didn't do anything. I just said, hey, I felt the air. It's crazy. Like, this is how you talk about it. You're like, I felt the air, and I said, this is the story. And everyone's like, that's insane. And then come time for the thing to happen, and they're like, what the frick? You're prophetizing off this.
Okay.
I wrote this a year ago.
So for the sake of future generations, and so that you can you'll have some proof of deniability, do you want to stare into the camera and tell the audience that it's October of 2022 and that you did not unintentionally try to spark a war with Taiwan, unlike the last time you accidentally sparked a war?
With Russia? Look,
just look into the camera. Just look into the camera and say it's not your fault.
I can't help that I launched Boom into ARC readership on NetGalley, and then apparently Putin or one of his advisors uses NetGalley, and they were like, this is brilliant. We will claim that America start proxy war with random child on border in the tech. It took them 2 weeks. Come on. Is that a coincidence? I don't think coincidences just exist.
Have you ever watched Wag the Dog?
Fortunately, since I'm in the middle of working on Bodymore 3, I'm likely not gonna have Boom ready by spring of next year. So unless somebody is watching this podcast and taking this idea right now, it may not happen until spring of 2024.
Okay, so
prepare yourselves.
Yes, prepare yourself for a war with Taiwan in summer of 2024 because spring of 2024 because that's when she's predicting it. This is her Nostradamus moment.
It's not 23, it's going to be 24. So that's all you get.
Yeah, have you watched the Wag the Dog, the movie?
I have not.
I just watched it this past week. It's a David Mamet movie from the 90s, and oh my gosh, watching it, I got Boom 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 vibes because it's about a political advisor in the 1990s who's trying to hide the fact that it's like 2 weeks from the midterms, and he wants to hide the fact that the president was just accused of pedophilia. So he launches a fake proxy war with an Eastern European country, basically with no evidence whatsoever, just as an excuse to divert the news cycle for just long enough for the election to happen. And it turns into this massive like behind the scenes scandal where he brings in a Hollywood producer, and it just spirals out of control radically into this massive scandal right up until election day. Like it's one of those things where you watch it and you wonder how the heck that can. It's like how the heck did this get through the screenwriting process? Because it's like nowadays. This feels too close to home. It feels like everything now just feels kind of like authored in a really shallow sort of way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's not even to say that everything is a conspiracy theory. It's just because everything is a narrative, and because there's so many people that are trying to just latch on to narratives and just move them in their own way and just do all these really cynical big political stunts that it feels like everything is fake, even though it's not. Even though it isn't necessarily fake. Obviously, the war in Ukraine it's a real war. People are dying, but I don't. It's hard to trust the media with everything when they're gonna just spin BS out of everything. I mean, no matter what direction it's going in, it just goes in every direction.
Yep, I really don't believe a whole lot of anything until I see it, and that's just from my existence of being burned interpersonally for so many years that people could say stuff straight to my face and be like, this thing is going to happen, or I'm doing this thing. And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll believe it when I see it. And if I don't get physical evidence up front, I can't believe it.
I will tell you, I do believe the story of the brave Ukrainian pilot, Samuel Haidovich, and his glorious one-man campaign against the Russian oppressors. And I'm sure I could find a photo and put him up in the corner or something. But
I believe everything that man does.
We mustn't forget the time Samuel Haiti drove the cargo ship into the side of the Egyptian Suez Canal, so just to destroy the world commerce. Or what was the most recent thing? I forget the last time I saw the Sam Hyde meme, but
I feel like there was a Haido-kun that had to do with something Japanese recently too. I feel like it had to do with the assassination.
Please don't tell me there was a Sam Hyde assassinated the Japanese prime minister. That's just.
I feel like there was.
But that story is sad. He's based.
It is really sad.
It's funnier when the massive world event is causing chaos.
Yeah, when it's not so personal. It's just really sad to bring up a smaller event. You're like, no. Sam Hyde crashed Grandma's funeral. Popped out of her casket, using her like a puppet to give her parting last words. The wake was in chaos.
Oh dear gosh, that sounds like a $1 million extreme clip. It really does. And I'm sure I'm sure he would have done something like that if given the opportunity. But oh my!
And you know what Grandma's final words were?
Oh no!
Hassan Piker, I'm gonna kill you in Minecraft.
No, in real life. I don't know if you saw. There was a good Lotus Eaters video about the in real life meme. Where they contrasted the philosophy of killing someone in Minecraft versus screaming that you're going to kill someone in real life. You know, it's more authentic when Sam Hyde just gets on stage and says, "I'm going to kill you in real life," than it is when every leftist and their brother just sits around talking about, "Oh, I'm going to abolish. I'm going to murder everyone I see in Minecraft." And like, well, that's a cop out if there ever was one. Wimp. Yep. But. Anyway, moving into less inflammatory territory, Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, you mentioned last year you'd made progress on a Jeffrey Dahmer book. I wasn't sure what the status of that was. Is that still in the pipeline at the moment, or is that on hold?
Yes, is the answer to that. I was revising it earlier this year because this year has been kind of a big oof for focus on a singular project. I spent a couple months working on Cain and Abel, which is my Jeffrey Dahmer inspired project. I spent a couple months working on a book called The Ghost Walk, which is about magic in Las Vegas, and I don't really need to super get into that one. But I was bouncing between those two basically for all of late winter and spring and part of summer because I couldn't latch on to the voice I needed to for whatever project and just be focused. So I was in the middle of revising Cain and Abel, and then I was like, maybe I should add this chapter or this perspective. Well, not perspective, but this chapter. I feel like I might need this, but since I was having such a struggle with getting into the voice, I kind of set it aside and then just determined, okay, I'm going to work on Bodymore 3 because I'm feeling the impulse to work on this, which Bodymore 3 is going well. I'm 56,000 words into revision, and I only started revision at the beginning of this month. So that's 56,000 words since October 1st. And that's a little more than probably around half of it. But that's the best that I've done this year for any project. But so I set Cain and Abel on the side to work again on that later because I don't think I need those new chapters that I was considering adding. I think it distracts from what I was trying to do. But I think I was just getting bogged down and not into the head that I needed to be in for that book. As weird as that sounds, I write very much by the impulse of the character voices, and I need to get deep into that, the way that they talk and the way that they interact with the world in order to write their voice. And you'll kind of get a sense of what I mean if you pick up any of my books, because Jan in Boom 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 has such a different way of speaking than Joey in Bodymore, and they both are in first person, but they have such different perspectives. If that makes any sense. I don't know if you've ever experienced that as a reader when you're reading maybe the same book from different or from the same person, and the character perspectives are just so vastly different.
I'm not sure offhand. Obviously, I brought it up because it just so happens that Netflix decided to drop their Dahmer documentary, and it has made the internet more insufferable than usual, especially for you. So, at least as far as the topic of Jeffrey Dahmer goes.
Because everybody likes to pretend they know what they're talking about, and they don't. And all the opportunists, especially. My favorite was, I can't. Some of my opinions are way too spicy to even like mention.
I've seen her unlisted videos on our YouTube channel. I can confirm this, but
what unlisted video? I don't know what you're talking about.
Never mind. Go on.
Well, my favorite is the one that was, there was a nudist article by somebody that was a reporter on The Thing at a time, and they're like, yeah, this Jeffrey Dahmer show on Netflix is pretty much entirely fake, which is the first thing that always pisses me off with stuff like this, because you've got the authors or the writer of the show's perspective into the thing, but they use the person's name to act like it's actually a documentary or a dramatized documentary or it's accurate to real life, and then they're basically rewriting somebody's life and the history of something, and they're actually making stuff up about the victims, about the families of the victims, about Jeff himself and his family, about all of the cops that were working on it and the city of Milwaukee itself, and they're just choosing how to frame all of these people and making it up, and because of the presentation, people think that that is accurate to what it was. And this double pisses me off because when I was in graduate school for creative writing, I will never forget this moment. We had one of the stories assigned was a nonfiction book called The Zoo Story, or A Zoo Story. And it was about the Tampa Zoo, the Lowry Zoo, and from a zookeeper's perspective there. And in this book, it was a memoir. And he wrote in the perspective of the animals a couple of times to have like the animals agreeing with his thoughts and be like them thinking about how the environment is or something like climate change or something like something very human. But he projected those thoughts on like the animals looked at me as if they were thinking of these human things, and I was in agreement with them. And so then we were in seminar because since this was a required reading, we had a seminar that was discussing the book. And so when given the chance for us to comment on what our thoughts were and responses to the book were, I raised my hand and said, I don't think it's the place for a nonfiction book to present fictional information, which was the guy reading the animal's thoughts. Giving the animals human thoughts is creating fiction presented in a nonfiction wrapper and then telling us to believe it. And that's inappropriate to label it as nonfiction. And you would not believe how many hands in that room immediately sprung up to fight me that it is okay to put fiction in a nonfiction book so long as it bolsters what the message that you're trying to send.
That's interesting. Good grief.
Then this was in a creative writing master's program. They were straight up saying it's okay to insert falsehoods into nonfiction, something labeled nonfiction, to do this. And so then when I look at stuff like this Jeffrey Dahmer thing, number one, I always freaking hate, because you can look at stuff like Dahmer versus Gacy and go, oh, that is so obviously fake, and they're sensationalizing these two killers against each other. Or like when South Park put Dahmer, Gacy, and Ted Bundy all in the Three Stooges. You're like, obviously this is not trying to be a historical account of anything. They're just referencing some of their greatest hits to make jokes. But then when you do something like the Netflix guy and you pretend that this is a dramatization of somebody's real life, people are going to watch that and genuinely believe that it is some sort of accurate documentary. Sometimes I say documentary, and I have no idea why. So if I mispronounce documentary, my mouth just places sometimes.
It's a classic case of putting too much emphasis on the wrong syllable.
Yeah, and I don't know why I do it. So it just that's what I mean if I do weird pronunciations on that. So with this, and then you saw it in the conversations about this story of people thinking that it's real, and it's not. And everybody always takes the simplest approach when they're opining about criminals, especially Jeff. I've had this conversation with people at my workplace because obviously I'm a Jeff scholar. I don't know if your viewers know that I am a Jeffrey Dahmer scholar.
Hey, you're more than welcome to establish your bona fides on this, but I
wrote my thesis for my. But by the way, I'm getting my master's degree in forensic psychology in December. So, and my master's thesis was on Jeffrey Dahmer and the psychosis that he went through because of loneliness, alienation, and isolation. and how those three things contributed and showed in the ways that he acted. And so, believe it or not, I am a Jeff scholar. I can give you the best of Jeff recommendations. And I was studying this before it was cool, and I'll be studying it past once this falls out of favor in like 6 months, because everybody's moved on to whatever. But everybody always just remembers the headlines and the greatest hits, but they never do the follow-up, and they very rarely do when he was younger, before he was a criminal, or the years leading up to his mania. I don't know if this show covered it. I think I heard something somewhere.
I should say that
saying that it included the mannequin in the story, but I don't know what all they covered in the show.
I should say, for the record, neither of us has seen the Dahmer series, because I don't watch Netflix all that much, and you don't watch a lot of television. But I think that you're in more than a position to talk about the phenomenon of Jeffrey Dahmer as a public figure. I do believe they go a little into his childhood, and I believe that the way they structured it is that the first half is more or less just recreations of the murders, and then the second half is the trials. Because one of the things I've heard coming out of the show is they tried to put a lot more emphasis on the victims, and to try to dig a little into what the implications of the people who suffered under him would have felt like. Which, that, as far as a serial killer show goes, that's a decent angle, because there is kind of this lurid pop fascination with true crime, and sometimes it's good to back away from that and kind of examine what that impulse represents, especially when 70% of the true crime audience is middle-aged wine moms, which...
Oh, I know. Oh, believe me, I have had something of a fight to be, in some situations, to be taken seriously, because too many people want to look at my interest, which is psychological, and examining the behaviors and the mechanisms and the rationale behind the action to understand how we got here. And too many people want to look at that interest and assign it or associate it with these fangirls. And it's kind of a thing to have to fight against that and be like, can we have the actual discussion? And having this interest does not mean wanting to bang the patients. But there is such a stigma and a stereotype of it that's why Harley Quinn exists the way that she does. Because there is a stigma with certain types of women wanting to bang the crazy bad guy. I freaking read a story recently called The Pawn and the Puppet that was also a nurse banging the most dangerous patient in the asylum. And there is this stereotype of women liking and wanting to change and be the one person that the dangerous man will not attack.
Yeah, I mean, you could. There's a whole. There's just a mountain of neo-Freudian textbooks that are just need to be that can be written on that subject, and it's probably not. It's probably just more depressing than anything else, but I know.
But also, Freud's not that legit. Let's not pretend that he is that.
Well,
it's not psychosexual. I have a problem with everything being reduced to psychosexuality.
I mean, I'm not a Freudian. I know people that are. I know people that say that there are elements of Freud that are absolutely worth defending. But I'm not Mr. Everything is a penis. I'm not that guy. But
yeah, I won't say that everything Freud has said was incorrect either. He played an important part in laying down some foundations. But I also don't think that everything boils back down to psychosexuality.
Yeah, although it is the tempting read when you talk about the wine moms, just because it's easy. But but I mean for you specifically, your angle with your Cain and Abel book is. I think it would be a useful antidote. Obviously, this is a case of the timing not exactly working out, which is rare in your life, evidently. But where had this come out this October, it would have made for some very interesting serendipity in your life. But I do think
possibly.
Yes. But I think for the most part, you're. Can you go again? You mentioned a little bit about your read, but what do you think that needs to be said on the Dahmer phenomenon that hasn't been said in our current discussion?
So what I think often gets overlooked is not looking at the serial killer or the dangerous person as the monster that everybody wants to reduce him down to, because whether it's a school shooter or it's a serial killer or it's whatever, one of these complicated explosions of just aggression, because that's usually what it is: aggression, frustration, social maladjustment. We see it on lower levels leading up to this thing. And what often gets ignored is, what are the machinations? What were the ingredients that led to this person becoming this desperate or this disconnected and delusional? And instead, we end up with a whole group of people, pretty much almost all of society, being like, well, why did this happen? I have no idea why this happened. Some people are just born evil. And I think that is too easy of a scapegoat to just say, we're never going to look into it because we don't want to look at how we treat each other or how we understand humanity or our part in any of this. And that's not to say that somebody is not responsible for their own actions when they do evil, but we also contribute to the culture that influences each other. And I think that's a really hard thing for people to take.
Yeah, that's something
if you get into these conversations about how we affect each other and our attitudes and the things that we say affecting other people, the thing that most people start doing immediately is, but I'm not responsible for other people's actions. But you can influence how they think. So we do need to be thinking about how what we say and what we do and what we support or don't support, how that affects the people around us. And it goes inside with all of the talk about why are the communities falling apart? Why don't people trust each other anymore? And then you come back to these conversations and you say, well, look at how we affect each other. And the first response is, I'm not responsible for you. I don't have anything to do with you. So people are really okay with being caustic and destructive to one another and then taking a step back and saying, I didn't do anything.
Well, it also speaks to just the shallowness of humans' understanding of one another, because I'm part of this month for the Chesterton group in Nashville. We read G.K. Chesterton's essay on King John, and one of the points he brings up in that is King John, who is this figure who's villainized by history in the likes of any Robin Hood tale as, the greedy king who's oppressing the population, who's kind of developed that reputation over time as being the villain of history. That he would not have been viewed in his time that way, as a strict villain, because at the time the worldview of the predominantly Christian subjects was that each person contains within them the fullness of goodness and the full ability to commit evil and to commit error and horror by their own volition and free will, and that within that fullness there is also the possibility of redemption and the ability to come out of it. In the previous world, there would have been this capacity to understand that a person has the fullness to both be a good person and that they can be redeemed at any point, where an evil king could repent and then go join a monastery and everyone would forgive him and no one would hold that his actions against him, because they all knew that person had understood the fullness of his error and addressed it before their creator and understood that. And we don't have that nowadays. We just have this kind of Heidian moral binary where you're either in the tribe or you're the guy shooting, or you're the outsider that's trying to attack us and you hate us and you're trying to, you exist to harm us. And that's what cancel culture is. It's essentially just you're cutting someone out of the tribe and sending them into the hitherlands to never return because you have transgressed our incredibly brittle and complex moral system, and now there's no chance of you returning unless you do something incredibly specific at some point, and suddenly everyone forgets the bad thing you did because people are arbitrary and their memories are stupid. But and I think that applies to Dahmer too, because I know a lot of your work has been kind of to explore the spiritual side of him and the possibility of his redemption and the possibility of coming back from the levels of depravity and horror that he did. And nowadays, the obvious people would obviously say, you're a serial killer. There's no way you can redeem yourself. You're a psychopath. You have no empathy. No one should ever trust you again. You should go into a prison and die, and no one will ever care about you again. But
that's even more insane when you see the people that are like, oh, you're a terrible person because you murdered people and you deserve to die. And then those same people that are condemning him for having killed people actually cheer it on when somebody else murders him. So it's like, do you really think that you're that much better because you're deriving pleasure right now from somebody else murdering somebody else?
Yeah, exactly. Our moral systems are so tribal that that the same moral action can be perceived as virtuous in one instant and horrific in another, and the only moral line is based entirely on just are you following the rules of this society we've all agreed to live on, and the moment you don't, then you are just now a bad person, and you will always be a bad person until good person sees to it that you are no longer breathing. Which
I don't think it even is necessarily that, because I think you see the same thing in a lot of modern day fiction that is coming out of the mainstream, where the good guys can have all of the immoral behaviors, all of the immoral characteristics, do all of the evil things, but as long as they are framed as the good guys, then their evil behavior is totally fine and actually moral. However, the opposite side, like the bad guys, can do even less stuff, like they kill fewer people, because the number of people that I've seen, a number of stories I've seen recently where the heroine is just like a psychopath that murders everybody in her way, and then they're applauded for it because, oh, she's the good guy and they're the bad guys. But the bad guys you never actually see doing anything bad because, one, they're typically incompetent, but two, they never actually put up a fight against the good guy because the good guy is so incompetent she couldn't stop them, really. So they can never actually have a successful plan. And the only thing that actually makes the main character not the bad guy is that the story is written from the perspective of this character is the hero. And everything is permissible so long as you're the hero. And that's kind of also copied in a lot of social circles where anything is permissible. Look at Keffels and the whole Keffels situation. Everything is permissible so long as you're, and that can also go for the J.K. Rowling situation, where J.K. Rowling has been receiving death threats and rape threats for years. And people will condemn that unless it is their guy doing that because they've deemed that J.K. is the evil person and they are the good guys. So anything that they do against the villain, totally permissible and not immoral.
Yeah, I mean, and it's incredibly brittle too. I mean, J.K. Rowling wrote the scriptures of the modern young progressive reader,
the modern millennial.
Yeah, exactly. Like more young people have probably read Harry Potter than they have like a Bible or a religious book or something that actually has moral instruction or wisdom inside it. And that's me, and I like the Harry Potter books, but the fact that they will throw their moral leader outside into the exterior darkness on such a short whim, it just shows how unforgiving and unfull their worldview is, and you see it in Jeffrey Dahmer as equally as you do with J.K. Rowling, because Jeffrey Dahmer obviously did something much more morally unsalubrious, for lack of a better word, but they're treated exactly the same. They are. They're kicked out. They're kicked out.
Go ahead. Reminds me of there are cancellation lists on Twitter of authors that you shouldn't read because they should be canceled. And you've got stuff that's like the level of murder right next to, oh, this person used a slur in their book. Like, there's no difference between there's stuff that's not even a slur. It's like, oh, this person at one point in one of their books said something mean about poor people. Like, there's no telling. Even if maybe that character is supposed to be a dick in that story. Aren't they allowed to? No, because the book said it ever once at all. Now we're assigning it to the author, and the author having a character that says something salacious or terrible at some point is now on the same level as this author over here raping people or killing people.
Yeah. So in short, the Dahmer series sucks. We haven't seen it, but it sucks.
And in short, going over to the way that I'm dealing with Jeff and the way that I'm bringing something different to that story. And this isn't to say that victims don't have their own issues that they do need to have ignored and dealt with. Like, we've so many different resources for victims and victim advocacy, but we don't really spend time getting to know what was behind the person that did something. Because we're so quick to say they're a monster, lock them up, never look at them again. They deserve to suffer in the worst ways possible with no redemption, examination as to who they are as a person. Everything is about dehumanizing the monster. That's why, like, everything that references Jeff, including this new Netflix series, monster in the title, because we're dehumanizing the crap out of that, so you never have to look at him as a person again. But he is also somebody's son, and that's what people often forget too, is that Jeff's dad is still alive. Jeff's dad is like in his 70s or near his 80s. He was in a documentary 2 years ago that came out in 2020. And he's just this little frail man. And you didn't see him coming out and talking about this new Netflix series because he's been minding his own business ever since everything happened. He didn't change his name. And that's one of the jokes I think that I saw on Steven Crowder's show, is they made jokes about how everybody in Jeff's life changed their name because they didn't want anything to do with Jeff. But everybody overlooks, which is one of the strongest things in Jeff's human life story that often gets overlooked, is the love that Lionel had for his son. My dad has ditched me for so much less, and Lionel still loves his son all of this time later. And that kind of unconditional parental love is something that is so rare. And that's not saying that Lionel was like, this is totally fine and I forgive my son for doing these things and everybody else should forgive him too. If you pick up the book, there's A Dark Descent, I think it was. It's by Pastor Ratcliffe, and it's the story of the pastor that baptized Jeff and worked with Jeff in Bible studies while he was in jail for the year up until he died. And I was going to go somewhere with that, his relationship with Jeff's dad. But where was I going to go with that?
Well, you're talking about his pastor and his...
I know it's talking about his pastor, but where exactly was I going to go with his pastor? I had a specific event in there. Well, that's just embarrassing.
You can take a second. We can cut this part out. I've already got to do edits to this anyway, so.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I've lost my train of thought like that before.
Well, there are a couple of things in there. One is that Jeff thought that he needed to commit suicide in order to repent for the actions in which he had done, because he believed that the Wisconsin court system failed the Wisconsinites by not giving him the death penalty because what he did was so abhorrent. Oh yeah, that's where I was going to go, was the funeral. Was that Jeff's funeral? But so let me finish that other one. He thought what he did was so abhorrent that he didn't deserve to live, and then he asked the pastor if he should kill himself because that was the only way to truly repent for all the lives that he had taken. But the pastor was like, the court is currently standing in for God on this human realm. So the punishment that they give you is the one that you deserve. Now, Wisconsin hasn't had the death penalty since like the 1800s, so they couldn't have given Jeff the death penalty. So the pastor was like, the best thing that you can do now is live repenting and try to live the best you can in the glory of God and in repentance of what you've done to those people. Killing yourself is not for the glory of God. So live the best that you can for that. Now, this was going back to what Jeff's father's unconditional love for his son is. At the end of the book, Pastor Ratcliffe was obviously invited to Jeff's funeral because he had a strong relationship with Jeff as a brother in Christ. And so when Lionel went up to give his eulogy, he had invited some of the families of the victims that he had become friends with, because after Jeff went to jail, he contacted a number of the families to try to build relationships with them over what they basically had in common and to kind of heal over the wounds that they were both dealing with in very different ways. And so the ones that he made with or had relationships with, he invited them to the funerals, and some of them came and some of them didn't. And while he was giving his speech, he said, I know that my son hurt you and that my son had done horrible things, but on this day where he has died, I would like him to just be remembered as my son whom I lost. And so even into that moment, like, he knew all of the terrible things, but he never stopped loving his son. And I think that's also something that is currently lost in a lot of discussion, is that you can love somebody past the terrible things that they've done and still hold them accountable for the terrible things that they've done, but still love them as a person. And so much conversation right now comes down to, you need to behave the specific way or you deserve to have nothing. You deserve to be hated and despised and burned. And that perspective of Lionel is never taken into account to anything. He didn't change his name. Jeff's little brother changed his name and distanced himself from Jeff, but Lionel never ran. Lionel continued to be a teacher, a substitute teacher in chemistry, and when people asked him about his son, he would generally still answer questions. You can see people talk about having Lionel as their substitute teacher in some of the comment sections on some of these videos. And he was just a very kind soul, and he constantly gets ignored for his son to be the butt of the joke and his unconditional love for his son to be completely ignored. For the perspective instead to completely dehumanize Jeff and forget that he had a family, that he was loved, that he came from somewhere. The other thing that's very interesting about the study of Jeff as a person is so many of these serial killers come from specifically very abusive backgrounds that either have physical or sexual abuse or both. And Jeff didn't have either, which makes him a very interesting character study. He did have a neurotic mother, and there are psychological studies. I recently did specifically readings on aggression and the development of aggression and how your brain changes as you're growing up. And kids listening to their parents yelling at each other through the walls can actually change how your brain develops. And so while he didn't deal with physical or sexual abuse, he did deal with the emotional abuse, the absent father growing up, and the neglect. And that's something that I think a lot of young people today are also dealing with. And if we're worried about people like Jeff and the destruction that just one person like him can do, then why is it that we're ignoring so many people that are going through the exact same thing that could result in that same thing? And I think ignoring these small things that we do to each other and the way that we establish community and families, ignoring that just to dehumanize somebody and become a monster, just lets all of us separate ourselves from the responsibility we have to each other or to our families or to our children to not let this happen to anybody. And it's something that gets because I don't think anyone wants to take responsibility for how we contribute to each other's mental well-being.
All right. I need to wrap up on my end, but tell people where they can buy your book.
Everywhere there's every kind of bookstore that you like. My books should be there. I've got 2 of them are audiobooks right now, ebooks and paperback. One of them is also a hardcover. But just look up Ian Kirkpatrick. I am not the record producer.
And you've got an audiobook coming out from one of your Twitter mutuals, so
Oh yeah, and I just recently did an audiobook if you like to hear me talk. It's a pretty short one.
What is the book?
To his series. The Onslaught Exile Wars.
Okay. I'm interested to hear the audiobook on that when it finally drops, but hopefully by the time this is out, that'll be within short proximity, so that'll be available at some point. But all right, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate talking to you again, and I hope the book does good. Sells 1 billion copies and launches you into the well-deserved infamy that you deserve. So.
Thank you so much for having me. Somebody out that's full somewhere, please just make one of my series become something so I can make more stuff and also feed my addictions that are totally legit.
Someone's got to.
It's like purchasing art, my guy. It's not like anything bad.
There's a lot of cocaine out there, and someone has to buy it because those cocaine farmers. All right, they have
bro,
to...
I'm not cocaine. Okay, I am art and Yakuza merch right now. I need some help.
Oh yeah, she's been streaming Yakuza 0 on her channel for the past couple of weeks. I'm not familiar with the Yakuza games, but she's been thirst posting mad behind the scenes. So.
No, I haven't. I've been making music videos.
Close enough. Anyway, thank you so much. Have a happy Halloween.
Thank you. You too. Happy Halloween. Don't die.
The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions and cultural review podcast. Editing, hosting, and producing are by Tyler Hummel, art by Crystal Cali, and original music is composed by Guap Squad Gang and Melissa Lafira. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment below and tell us anyone you think would be a good guest for the show. Thank you for listening.